Hi everyone. I've had a number of requests for tutorials, so I thought that I would start with this picture that I've been working on. I'm about to start on the second eye, and I thought that that would be a good place to start. So just move this over a little bit and then we'll get started. So as you can see, I have the basic sketch in here. Let's get this a little adjusted. And so I usually start out getting some of the harder edges in, so I know where I'm at in the drawing. And just to give you guys an idea, I'm going to swing this over here for a second and show you that's the reference that I'm using. So and we're just going to come in here and get outside of the eye in. So when I'm drawing a face, I really try hard to think about if I were to be, actually, obviously this is kind of weird because we're talking about an eye right now, but if I were to be running my hands over different parts of this person's face, what that would feel like. And that essentially is the movement of the pencil that you want to mimic when you are drawing it. So obviously with an eyeball, we know that eyeballs are a lot bigger than what we end up seeing of a person's eye. So it's very spherical. So we're really working on trying to feel that when we're doing the drawing. So I usually go in with a lot of my really darks, the stuff that I know is just unmistakably dark. So on her eyes, it's a lot of this side part of her eye is really dark and really crisp. It's always the tough part of using really soft lead, is that it breaks really easily. But again, when we're doing this, we want to maintain that round part here, that spherical feel to what we're drawing. And then she's got a lot of highlights in her eyes. I don't know what she was standing in front of, but big parts of her eyes are covered in reflection. So by just looking at the picture, we can kind of come in here and draw some of those in. Okay, so we start to get all of that in there. And then there's going to be a lot of stuff that's sort of more mid-tone. And that part, you just go lighter on. Just don't press as hard. Or if you're using lots of different kinds of hardness of pencils, you can always shift to other pencils that are not as soft, just to make those lighter shades. And then once I've gotten, so a little bit more to do here, just in terms of the really dark darks that are very definitive. But once I've gotten most of that in, then what I do is I usually use get the right one here, or tortillon or a stump, whatever you have. Something that has a nice point on it though. And I usually come in and then I'm gonna just soften everything. So when you look at an eyeball, if you go back over to the reference here, let's see if I can make this a little bigger, there we go. This part of her eye, you've got the really dark black line there, but then it sort of, it fades out a little bit. It's a soft edge, even though it's a dark, a very sharp edge, it's also a soft, sharp edge. So we're gonna make sure that we are, if I just leave it like this, then it'll look odd, right? So we're going to make sure that we soften that a little bit. And I do that by making a lot of the stuff that I do with this. I just do small round circles and it just drags a little bit of the graphite out of there. And then this part just takes some practice in terms of how much to do and how far to bring it. And then I'll switch over to one that's cleaner. And I'll drag that out a little bit more. So then you see that we're going to start to get some of the shading of her eyeball, of the white part of her eye. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side here. And this side of her eye has a lot of marks on it. So we're just going to put some of those in. I usually, once I have one of these, it has a little bit, I have, varying degrees of graphite on mine. Some of them are like completely covered and like this one. Which I would only use for something like her neck, where it's, it's really covered. But for these, I have varying degrees, and sometimes, so these I didn't know this for a really long time, but these are actually, you can use one of these pieces of sandpaper, and you can actually sand these down, and then it just cleans them up. So they're sort of reusable in that way. With these, which I also like to use, these are not sandable. So these are longer use in that sense. But I usually keep a bunch of them. So some of them have more or less graphite on the ends of them. So then you can sort of use them as a lighter shade pencil to do some blending. So I'm gonna come back in here with one that has more graphite on it. And I can start to create some of that shading. And again, this is where you can start to soften some of your edges. It doesn't need to be perfect right now. We're really just getting the shape of it in, and then we're going to come back and we're going to really like fine tune it. And again, even when you're making these little marks, keep in mind that this is round. And so you want to keep this, your movements in that same direction as if you're running your hand around a sphere. And at this point, don't be too worried if it starts to look really dark and you're like, oh, that's probably darker than the white spot that I can see in the picture. That's okay, because we have erasers, and that's the whole point is you're going to bring in these darks and then you're going to use your eraser to pull out some lights. I find that easier than doing the opposite, which is like trying to like avoid, like sometimes you really want to avoid like on teeth or something. You don't want to get them really muddied because you need them to be white. But in situations like this where, there might be just like a highlight, that's where this tool is really helpful. It's an electric eraser. And I use this sandpaper to make this into a really fine point. This is just rechargeable. They're awesome. You can get them on Amazon, probably at art stores also. And then once you have a really fine point on it, then you can come in here and you can use that. It allows you to make really precise and detailed highlights. Or if you screw up like that, it allows you to clean that up without much problem. So just for reference, I'm using mechanical pencils. I have Pentel Einstein leads in here. I love them. They're my favorite lead that I've ever used. Super buttery, super smooth. They're never gritty, which I really appreciate, and they just glide onto the paper really, really well. I'm using Strathmore 500 series Bristol board plate. It is very smooth. I often get a lot of flack from people because they're like, how can you do that kind of drawing on Bristol board? I don't know. I like it. A lot of people I know who do this kind of drawing really like something with more of a tooth. So they'll use vellum, or they will use, I know some people even use like fine watercolor paper. I've certainly tried lots and lots of different kinds of paper. And this is the one I've always come back to. I just love it. Not cheap in order to buy a big sheet like this. So for this is just to give you an idea of size of this picture, in its full size. It's 16 by 20 inches, and it is one of these sheets of paper costs around, which I think like between $25 and $30 a sheet here in the U.S. So just to give you an idea of that. Just going to clean this up a little bit. Always the hazard of working. I try and cover my work, excuse me, while I'm doing it, but sometimes I just don't, and then it's a mess. But also why I love this paper, it is just so forgiving. I can erase and erase and erase and erase and erase on here, and it is never really an issue. It just comes right off. So anyway, that's the paper and the pencils that I'm using. I also have other pencils that I do use. I use Mitsubishi Hayuni. I have a set of those, and specifically I have them in a 10B, and this is the darkest softest lead that I have been able to find that's pure graphite. You can find other stuff like the Mars Lumograph, but those are mixed with, I think with carbon maybe, with something else, something that makes them really dark. But it does have a different look to it when you put it on the paper. It has a very flat, doesn't have any no sheen or shine to it at all. So if I want something that's just like straight up black, like this part down here, I will use these. I go through them really fast. They are very soft, but compared to other 10Bs that I've used and tried, this one is by far the darkest. And again, that's Mitsubishi Hayuni. I found them on Amazon. You can get like a pack of like 10 of them. They're not super expensive. All right, so back to the eyeball. So come back up here. This is where I like to get some of these other darks again that just sort of ground it a little bit. So I don't commit a ton, like I'm not like going really hard in there, but just to kind of get my bearings a bit. And then obviously this is the skin coming off of the eyelid rolls away from the eye. So creating lines that do that. And then for this, there's the water line of her eye. There's a really fine water line there where you have a good highlight. So that's one of those areas. Let me get you back in here so you can see what I'm doing. Sorry. And there's this water line, and I will try not to cover that too much because it's just fine and it would be hard to put back in. So I leave that as is. And then the rest of her eye here. So we're just going to come through and soften a bunch of this. And again, I use little round circle motions along the dark parts of the lines. And that allows me to soften it, but keep the shape of whatever it is I'm drawing. And then this part down here, same thing. And then once you have this in, I'll show you the reference one more time. So obviously there's different shades of, if you look at like this part right here is obviously darker than up here where there's a really sharp highlight. And we're gonna just keep building on this. So the biggest thing I can say and the best advice I can give with doing any kind of like hyper-realistic graphite work is layers. The whole thing is just about layers. I'm constantly like adding a layer in and then building upon that. And so that's why you don't need to like commit to just going in really hard with as dark of a black as you can create right off the bat. You can do bits, and that works really well. Because you're always going to come back in and do more. And then you also have all the detail work that goes inside of that. And even after you've softened it, you're going to come back in and you can make some of these spots like really within that softened line. You can make it sharper and then soften it again. And it's just a lot of layers. That's what makes it end up looking really rich and real. Like all of this part of her face back here and her hands. I mean, there's probably easily like 5 to 10 layers of drawing that I've done on that to get it to build and make it so that it ends up looking really three-dimensional. Okay, and again here, this part is going to roll back from her, skin is going to roll away from her eye. And then it does a lot. So this section here does a lot of different things. So we've got these lines here that go back into this wrinkle of her eyelid. So getting that dark line in there. And then coming off of that, we have the skin going this way. So we're going to do they kind of stretch out as you get further onto the eyelid or further back here. And the shadow gets a lot deeper as you get further out here. But it kind of pulls, so it's going to come up and over, and it's also going to be pulling this way into the crease. So again, you can do the main lines, and then you can come back in with this and start to blend some of that out. Again, I use those round circles, and I will sometimes go in the direction of the way the skin is being pulled. And you start to see the beginning. So that's your first layer. Very rudimentary. If you zoom in, it doesn't look like a whole lot. And then now comes our next layers. Okay, so I'm going with the shadow that's right above. So that lash line always looks a little darker. Okay, we're just going to start building some of these layers. And we know that this right up here is super dark, right up along where the eyelid meets the eye. So I'm coming in here with my 10B and really getting that in there dark. Same thing with this side here. You can see it's starting to have a little bit of the and then again we've got this waterline, which is dark. And then we're going to come in here and again pull down. Think about the way that this part of the eye is. It goes into the lower, right underneath the eye. It's a little puffy. Comes out a little bit away from the eye socket. If you have not studied anatomy of the face, and you want to do this kind of drawing, I would highly suggest it. I started when I was in high school. I got the anatomy coloring book, and I didn't color any of it, but I used all of the anatomical drawings as as I copied them. I would just look at them and then draw them in my sketchbook. And learning where the musculature is on the face and around the eyes and the eye socket and the mouth, as well as the rest of the body, has been incredibly helpful for learning how to draw people well. Because you start to understand like how these muscles layer and how they all go together, and really it teaches you how to create that depth in a way that actually makes sense as if you were looking at a person. If you don't have that understanding, I think it's probably really difficult to master this kind of drawing. I think you really need it. All right. All right, so there we have the general layout of the eye. And now we can go back through and we can start to add a little bit more details. Another layer. So now you got the background in there with all the shading. You can kind of come back in here and you can look at some of the more specific detail of like the water that's in her eyes here, the wetness. And so you can kind of put that in. And then you can also come back in with our eraser and pull out some of the really brighter highlights. And then this part of her eye right here is pretty dark in shadow. I'm trying to adjust my light a little bit. This is a tough time of day in my studio where sometimes the light from above me, I have a light or a window above me in here, so it creates a weird glare. I want to make sure you guys can see this. So that looks better. All right. Okay, so you can see it's starting to come in here, and we want to make this look round, right? Because it's a fold in her skin. So I'm gonna actually go a little lighter here, and we're gonna, again, using strokes that are, if you were to be running your fingertip over this part of a body, what would that look like? It would look like coming towards you. And it would be along these wrinkles. You want to follow the lines of that because that's the way the skin is pulling. And if you don't quite get what I'm talking about, grab like an apple or a piece of fruit or something and just hold it in your hand and run your hands around it and like feel the way that the apple comes in to the top where the stem is, and feel how on the bottom it has the bumps that go into where the flower was, and really run your hands around it and experience that. I mean, honestly, you could do it with any object. You know, this is like where I put my, like anything. It could be absolutely anything, but something round is the most relevant for something like this. And just practice that, and then you can even try drawing an apple. Take that apple and try and draw it, and try and do what I'm talking about, where you really are just using that same motion that you would use to feel the apple to draw it then. And you'll start to see, and again, don't get frustrated if you do it and it doesn't look perfect at first. Remember, everything you draw, if you want it to look realistic, you have to do a million layers. And so stick with it. And it will begin to come into focus and look three-dimensional. Okay, so we've got that. And then what I'd like to do is, if you look at her eyelid in the photo, I'm gonna sharpen my eraser here for a second. It has these very fine highlights along the creases of her skin on her eyelids. So just coming in here really light. And if you go too far, if you do it and you're like, oh, it's too much, you can always come back through. And like that looks too stark for me. Like I want it to be a lot more soft than that. So you come in, same kind of round strokes, but also sort of moving in the shape of the eyelid. And we're just going to blend some of that out so it softens it. So you still have the lines in there, but see if I can get in there so you guys can really see it. So we're just softening some of this. And then again, she's got like this part up front here is a little bit lighter. So I just come in and sort of touch this with the eraser, just make tiny little spots. Kind of squiggle it. Remember, skin is imperfect. It has a lot of dips, and so you want to make sure that when you draw, you're not just doing straight lines, or it will look weird. It won't look real. If you do stuff in patterns, it's not going to look very good either. Because faces and skin are not that uniform. Okay, so there's that layer. I'm going to come back in here. I'm going to use a tip that's not quite as, I started to use that one. It's a little darker than this one. So I'm just going to come in here and again, really lightly, just go over this. And then the underside of this, because remember the eyelid comes in, it folds under, right? So we're going to, that same round stroke, come and shade the bottom side of this eyelid. All right, and if I pull out a little bit here, you can see it's starting to come together as an eye. And then part of building an eye is really the skin that's underneath the eye is also super important, because an eye, obviously an eye has its own spherical shape, but it's set within this eye socket. So you're going to have the shape going this way, and then you have a cheek that's going this way, coming into the eyeball. So it's going to go in, dip down, and then come up over the eyeball. And then you've got, so there's so many different planes that are happening, right? And that can feel overwhelming. Try not to let it overwhelm you too much. You'll get it. A lot of this is about just training your eyes to see the way that you need them to see. And so much of it is about shape and bits of light, right? So like coming through here, we see that if you look back at the drawing, this part of her eye out here is really dark, right? And up in this eyelid, it's really dark. So coming back in here, we're going to start to make this part fall back. And you do that by creating dark and then bringing it forward. But the underside of her eye is really dark as well through here. So it's really about creating that bulge of her eyelid where it's really thick right there. Again, keeping with the shape of the eyelid. So that's the second layer there. We're going to come back in and start to create that more three-dimensional look. I don't have like a magic number for you on how many layers I do on any given thing. I just do it until I feel like it looks right. Until it has the desired effect that I'm looking for in terms of how much is popping off the paper or how much is receding if it's something that I want to fall back. Eyes are tricky because they're further back than the rest of the face. But again, they're spheres within their own right. So like you're receding it, and then at the same time you are trying to make it round. Tricky. I think any spots on a face or a body where two planes meet and they go in different directions is always really tricky. Chins, same thing. Like here, you got, this part which is falling away from you. It's going under, but then it comes up here and it's the skin bunches up when you smile. So then this is going into a flat plane right here. So any of that can get really tricky, but I think with practice, you get a lot better at it. So I'm going to bring in some of these much darker darks out here, because this part of the eye, so this is another spot where the planes sort of meet and they're doing a lot of different things. So you have the eye that's going this way, and then it's also falling away because you're going onto this side of the face, which, the face is going like this. It's going like that. So you want this side to be further away than this side is. So you need to make sure that your shadows are matching that and bringing that back into shadow a little bit more. All right, I'm just going to come back through and make all this look a little bit more glassy by doing a little bit of shading. and some darkening. Just remember, whenever you use your eraser on a face, always come back and soften that space again. Otherwise it'll look too abrupt and it will look too sharp. I mean, unless you're doing like a specific highlight, like over here with these little tiny squares of light, you know, that's different. But when you're just doing general highlights, you really want to make sure to soften those. Otherwise, they're not going to look real. And the electric razor is really great for this because it just lets you come in and like make dots of light. And you can always use, like, this is a 7H, which is obviously is really, really hard. But sometimes it's really good for if you need stuff that's really controlled but light. You can use them for that. And again, with a pencil like this, you don't want to push hard. It will dent your paper. It'll rip your paper. They're not very user-friendly unless you have a really light touch. So, and I would say that's true for anything above like a 3H. They will just scratch your paper if you're not careful. So they really are designed to draw just with really, you know, they're not designed for you to push it all. Just whatever mark it would make if you doing it lightly like this, that's very much a 7H line or shading. So, whereas something that's really like this one, which is a 4B, and is super soft, it's a lot easier and it's fine to push. And it's not going to damage your paper. You'll probably break your lead before you would damage your paper. All right, so I think that's the first part of this tutorial. Let me know if this is helpful. This is my first YouTube tutorial, so hopefully you guys like it. And if you want me to do a second one where I go into doing some more of the shading around the eyes and like create that space around the eye socket, I would love to do that, but let me hear from you. All right, thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to subscribe to my channel, please. And I'm on TikTok at BentRailArt, and I'm on Instagram at _BentRailArt. And you can find my work and prints and commission work on Etsy. If you search under shop, you'll find me under BentRailArt. Thanks for watching.